Yeah. So technician, just depending on the overall organization, right? And but largely a technician is getting a work order, right? So whether they get the work orders for the entire day, the entire week, or some organizations feed technicians work orders one at a time. Basically, that first work order of the day, they're gonna look at the scope of work, understand what they need from the customer, and then once they've identified that, they know where they're going, they know what their point of contact is, they kind of know they're kind of thinking through a plan of action for that first call. That's when you hit to what most of us call the truck roll, right? And the truck roll is literally they get out the house, they leave the office, they get in a truck, and they're heading. But on that truck roll, right, you've got a couple things where they've got inventory. Typically, we refer to it as truck stock or van stock, depending on what system you're using or the language. But then they need to have accurate inventory, because more likely than not, when they get there to resolve the problem, they're going to need some parts, tools, or materials to resolve the issues. So once they're in the truck, they're en route. They're kind of updating work orders and systems that communicate with the customer along the way. And so that's kind of like your pre-site activity, that communication, the inventory, and then safely getting there. I know a lot of us have telemetrics on our vehicles for speeding and wearing seat belts and hard stops and all of that stuff as well. And then they get on site, right? So they get on site, they have some description or brief summary of what the problem is, and then they've got to dive into it, right? So they've got to dive into troubleshooting, diagnosing, and then attempting to resolve that problem as often as possible on that first trip. So hopefully they can, they've got the competence and the tools and the support that they need to resolve it on the first trip. And then once they're done with that trip, they've kind of got like that post-trip activity, right? That's reconciling their inventory, making sure they're capturing all the details associated, entering how much time they spent, what materials they use, how far they traveled. And that's all the stuff you need to make sure that you've got a correct invoice, right? When it comes to billing the customer for that support. And that's some of that activity. Sometimes they've got a transactional survey. How did I do today? Did you appreciate my service? And then hopefully that's resolved, right? If there is another trip required because you didn't have the parts, or maybe there's a callback afterwards, they kind of repeat that similar process and going in. But ultimately the goal is to get there safely, have the material in hand, resolve the problem for the customer on that first trip. Maybe not the first try. Maybe they got to try a few things while they're on site. But ultimately, before you leave, you want that customer in a better situation than what they were, right? And they're interacting with a number of systems, right? Their work order systems, probably some communication with the back office, documentation, manuals, and all of those things as well that they're using.